Several years ago, the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society developed the first iteration of Staying Connected, facilitating the learning experience during and after cancer treatment. A 3-hour in-person professional development program for teachers, school nurses, social workers, guidance counselors, and other school personnel focused on the needs of children and adolescents and young adults who have survived or are being treated for any type of cancer. Today, the program has expanded to a 6.5-hour online interactive course, offering continuing education credit and including video vignettes of children and adolescent young adults, their families, and medical professionals focusing on the cancers that affect children and adolescent young adults, psychosocial challenges for survivors throughout their education, laws that protect the rights of childhood and AYA survivors, strategies to help meet the students' needs, resources to support schools and families. This video panel will offer practical information on communicating with students during and after treatment for cancer, their classroom peers, and school staff, addressing issues that may arise, and will provide examples for how to deal with those challenges. I'm pleased to introduce our panelists who will share their experience with you today. Alvisia, a 7th and 8th grade English teacher from Texas, David, a school nurse from California, Nicole, a guidance counselor from Florida, Susan, a principal from North Carolina, and I'm Courtney, a school liaison from Kentucky. Let's get started. The first question that we're going to discuss today is, what is your role with your student transition back to school or continuing in their school journey during treatment? So I'd like to start with Nicole, if you'd like to provide some feedback about that.
Sure. Thank you guys for having me. My name again is Nicole Martinez. I'm a school counselor at a school in Wellington, Florida. And the student that I'm going to be speaking of today is actually now in 6th grade, but when he started with us in kindergarten, and that was when he was formally diagnosed with leukemia. And back when he was 5 and in kindergarten, he was kind of in and out of the hospital undergoing treatment. And not only am I the school counselor, but I'm also the 504 plan coordinator. So one of the things that we did to help support this student and his family is to develop an accommodation plan to just assist him with some health needs, with some social needs. Some of the accommodations we put into place were just making sure that he was frequently hand washing, to make sure that the students in the class were frequently washing their hands, making sure that he had access to snacks and a water bottle at all times. Of course, we did not want him drinking from the school water fountain. You know, it was interesting because at the time, like I said, the student was 5 and he was undergoing chemo and losing his hair. But, you know, kids at that age they're just so like nothing phases them. They really didn't care why the student was losing his hair. You know, he was a very nice boy and he socialized and he played with others, and all they really cared about was, you know, that he was nice. You know, that outward appearance doesn't matter so much to kids at that age.
Does anybody have anything to add to that?
Sure. Thanks, Courtney. My name is David, and I am a school nurse in Bakersfield, California. And I'm also the father of a blood cancer survivor. So thank you so much for having me on this panel today. I'm just going to kind of piggyback on what Nicole was saying on a lot of these different topics, but my role as a school nurse is to kind of be that bridge, that liaison between the healthcare world and also the educational world. And so there's a lot you can do as a school nurse, especially for patients that are returning back to school that may need accommodations and whatnot after cancer treatment or while they're still in cancer treatments. I've worked with some families within a nonprofit that I run here locally that actually ran into some difficulty getting accommodations at school. Some of that difficulty came from parents really just, you know, not understanding kind of the process, maybe not knowing how to advocate for their child, maybe not even knowing what a 504 is, as Nicole had mentioned what a 504 is, or an IEP. And unfortunately, I have heard of some districts that just flat out refuse to make appropriate accommodations for children. So we're hoping that everybody kind of on this call can kind of help, advocate and lead the charge so that these children can get the accommodations that they need in the school setting to be successful. And like I said, my job is actually to assist those parents and families and the patients to understand that process, to loop in any ancillary staff, like maybe the school psychologist or a counselor that may need to be a part of that discussion so that we can make those accommodations. Sometimes it's the whole multidisciplinary team. It might be the principal, the teacher, it might be everybody, the parents, even the student, if they're older and they can kind of understand what's going on. I've kind of seen the gamut over the years on how this kind of plays out. I'm fortunate in my district where our team is very supportive and really come together. We've known quite a few students that have had various types of cancer, especially blood cancers that have come back to school and have been in treatment in school. So again, as a father of a blood cancer survivor and a school nurse, I know firsthand how challenging this can be for our families. And I really strongly encourage anybody watching this video to really kind of lead the charge in advocating for these patients in the school setting, because quite frankly, school may be that normal that those students need, or the closest thing to normal after their diagnosis. So thanks so much, Courtney.
Thank you.
So I was going to add, I'm Susan Fail, a principal in Mooresville, North Carolina. One of the things when David spoke about schools and parents not really knowing or being willing to work with a family of a student that's been diagnosed is what's available. And I think one of the most important things as a school principal is understanding your local and state regulations, who would qualify for a 504, who would qualify if an IEP indeed is needed under other health impaired, and understanding really truly what those look like for a diagnosis. And I think one of the first things principals have to do once they're made aware of the situation of a diagnosis or a student may be entering your school is to sit down and meet with that family, get an understanding of what this looks like, what it's going to be like, what kind of possible accommodations are needed. In many instances, in my experience, we've worked directly with the healthcare provider to get their input, and we meet as a team with the school counselor, the nurse, the teacher, anyone that would be near or around the student that's been diagnosed. So it's really crucial to really understand and know the state recommendations, requirements to qualify. Especially in my case, it's been typically a 504, and how that can be a fluid document that should change based on treatment, based on diagnosis, things like that.
I think you all make really great points, and just really recognizing that each of the students do have rights, have educational rights, and they do have access to 504s and or IEPs based on qualifications. And just the best thing that parents can do is just make themselves aware of those rights at the federal level and at the state level to best advocate for the plan that would best help their child. So thanks for sharing those great points. How do you address the disease with the students' peers and the student body?
Well, I believe the first step when you have a current student enrolled or a student that's planning on enrolling once they've been diagnosed is really understanding from the parents where they're at as far as wanting people to know where they're at, as far like what age level is the kid. Those are all important things. And then it's crucial to assign a teacher that you know is going to be cooperative, someone that's going to support this student, that really has those nurturing relationships, that communicates well. And the other piece to that is, when this kind of situations comes into your school, and it's different. You can't compare situations like a student from 2 years ago you might have had to one coming in now. And you also have to understand from the parents what it is they want you to share with, whether it's the faculty, whether the other students, and then the level of developmental appropriateness comes into play between a kinder student and a fifth grade student. And I think the best advice I could give from an admin side of a school is you've got to ask questions. Parents want their kid in the school. And like we said earlier, normalcy is what helps these kids with their treatment and with their struggle. So you've got to ask questions and not be afraid to ask the hard questions, so that way the school can best meet the needs of the kid.
Hi, I'm Avicia Roberts. I'm a teacher for 7th and 8th grade. I also taught 6th grade, which is when I met my student. He was actually in remission when he came in. The principals contacted me to let me know that I was getting a new student, and it was about halfway through the year. But he also had been in the district, so students in my class, which one particular student was like his best friend, they already knew his situation and they already knew what was going on. And they knew also that he was coming because they had been talking to him, outside of school before he got there. So everybody was very accepting of him when he came. He was very open about what he had going on. He had a prosthetic. He was proud to wear that prosthetic. He would wear shorts, if he had pants on, he'd hike that pant leg all the way up. So he, was very comfortable in the classroom. And I also made it known that, hey, if you have questions, ask me, but he was fine with those questions. And I think it's important also to communicate with the parent. At the beginning of every year, I always send a letter to the parent asking, what do I need to know about your child? Please share, their, goals and, their, what they struggle with. And so I immediately reached out to her and she reached back out to me. So we were in constant communication with his parent, as well as just kind of gauging, how he was when he came into the classroom and just kind of just going off of his vibe and getting a sense of how comfortable he was with everything.
That's great. And I think it's wonderful that you provided such a welcoming classroom environment to make that just an easy transition for that student. How did the school support the student with cancer? Were there celebrations, fundraisers held in the students in honor of the student with cancer? Was homework delivered to the hospital or one-on-one tutoring? Any other ways that the school was able to support a student? David, would you be able to speak to this?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Courtney. So I've seen kind of the gamut with how this has been handled kind of throughout districts and, and with different students. But I do want to highlight two specific students that kind of come to mind to answer this question. One of the students, the family was very, very private. They really didn't want anything shared other than like what we would consider to be like need to know staff. So the staff that were like kind of caring for that student, the teacher, the principal, the people that are going to be interacting with that student on a day-to-day basis. But they wanted to kind of keep that normalcy, if you will, of pre-diagnosis kind of intact as much as possible. So they really didn't want any changes as much as possible or special treatment. And those were kind of the wishes of that family. They felt like that was the best way to kind of navigate this situation for their students and for their family. And we respected that, and the student ended up being extremely successful. But again, as Susan had mentioned earlier, we took the time to talk to those parents and kind of gather that information to make sure that we were handling it in an appropriate manner. Because a lot of people want to just go gangbusters and help in any way that they can. And sometimes people will overstep and help out too much, and it becomes very uncomfortable for parents and families. So we want to make sure that we're respecting their wishes and we're, handling that in an appropriate manner. The other student that comes to mind was the polar opposite. I mean, it was like he was a celebrity status in the school, and there were like, fundraisers and walks in his honor, social media. There wasn't a day where he wasn't mentioned all over the place. The community as a whole just absolutely came together for the students. The news, you name it. And again, the family was very open to that. They felt like that was a way that they could celebrate their students and kind of, empower him and keep him going through the battle. So again, just as Susan had mentioned earlier, it's super important to just spend the time to get to know the wishes of the families because some want to keep it very private and other ones like to just celebrate. So,
Susan, as a principal, do you have anything to add to this? Have you had any examples?
I do. In this situation, the student that I had direct contact with was diagnosed before kindergarten and went into remission in kindergarten. But then by middle of first grade, he relapsed and then relapsed again. So that's pretty much all the school knew of him. And it was similar to the second story David shared, where everybody jumped in. So part of that was managing all that and not to overwhelm the family. So it went back to the communication piece of how can the school manage, because every teacher that taught him, every kid that had him, everybody wanted to help. But what I noticed in this particular case, it ebbed and flowed, I guess is a good expression, that, during the times of relapse, things just, we kept it calm. We kept things just, there wasn't a lot of celebration, a lot of positivity. We kind of took it based off what the family wanted, what the family needed. And again, it goes back to the principal leading that charge with communication. But then as he, went into remission and during some of the treatments, I, as a principal, sometimes took charge because, teachers are working hard, have the class full of kids, the counselors working with kids. So just little things that I could do to help facilitate would be, FaceTiming him, walking him around the school, visiting his classroom, visiting the office staff, enhancement teachers, just to keep that connection to the school. And one of the other interesting things that came from this, what we learned is that, year after year, classrooms would send loads of get well cards. We miss you, we wish you were here, get well. So eventually the student said, I don't want any more get well cards. I need funny. And he communicated that. So we, as a school, I communicated that to the teachers, to the staff, and we changed our tune. And really what he responded most with were videos. I can't dance. I don't pretend I can dance, but that family, he's a really, really good dancer. So making videos of myself dancing it would make his day, make his week. So again, kind of what we've all mentioned is that communication piece. You've got to stay in touch with the parents and know where they're at, where their child's at, and what best we can do to support that, take their lead.
That's a really great point. Communication is absolutely key. Moving on, how did the school support its own staff? Were there in-services to help educate school staff? How did the school staff practice self-care when dealing with these sorts of situations? Nicole, would you like to start us off with this question?
Sure. The student that I'm speaking with, he was involved with a cancer agency within our county. So one thing that really helped us was this third-party agency coming in and helping to educate our staff and our teachers into what his wants and his needs were. So that was a really great in-service that they provided to us. And I know LLS has always been really good about providing, that information to us as well. So, as far as like the supportive side, we were very lucky to have the support that we had for this student, but, I have a feeling that I might be in the minority. Maybe some other schools haven't been as lucky to have the support.
Obviously, what's your experience as a classroom teacher?
When he came in, we were notified because he was in remission. The only thing that we sat down and talked about was that he had a 504 plan because of the prosthetic and because he was ADHD. So everything that I did in the classroom to support him was to support the fact of, how he got around, his mobility. He's able to take the elevator. I would allow him to stand, and that had part to do with his ADHD. He could stand at his desk, because he liked to move around a lot. But other than that, like as far as the cancer part of it, there was nothing that we were told. Like I didn't know if I needed to clean the desk a certain way, or just to make sure he didn't relapse or something. They didn't provide any information about the cancer part of it.
Thanks for sharing that. And I'm sure that was really difficult as a classroom teacher to have a lot of unknowns. So thanks for sharing that perspective. David, what are your thoughts on this?
So as a school nurse in my district, I'm kind of the point person for a lot of these in-services. As you know, that's how we handle it in our district here. We are a smaller kind of rural district, so it is difficult sometimes to get outside agency support to come in to do in-services. So I'm happy to take that on. and help kind of educate the staff about kind of what might be some of the medical issues. As Alicia had mentioned, maybe there's a prosthetic, or maybe they have a port still, that we need to be worried about when they're playing on the playground, or maybe they've actually got lumens that are hanging out. We need to be careful of that they don't get, injured or anything in that area while they're playing on the playground. But I think it's important as a school nurse to kind of start with maybe looking at the healthcare providers to see if there's any medical kind of aspects that might need training for staff. Again, as Alicia had mentioned, maybe there are specifics in the classroom that need to be, addressed medically, where the staff need to be kind of trained on that. And then also partnering, as we've said time and time again, with the parents, with the family, to find out what information they are comfortable sharing, so that I can tailor that in-service to meet the needs of that specific student and that specific family. So maybe they do want all of the students in that classroom to be notified that they're going to be losing their hair. And we're going to be notifying all the staff as well. Do you know what I mean? So we may be actually tailoring that in service to be a little bit more broad and cover like all staff in the school versus just the need to know staff. And some of that, you want it to be grade appropriate as well. And you want it to make sure that, I've had some in-services where we've actually had the students involved and in this in-service as well, so that they can comment on some of their personal experiences. And, this is what I like, or this is what I don't like, so that everybody is on the same page and we can best take care of the students kind of in the school setting. In one situation, our patient was actually the child of a staff member. So we handled that situation a little bit more delicately, if you will, just because it was just that much closer of a connection with all of our staff within the school. And we paid extra, attention to the self-care piece that you had mentioned, Courtney, earlier. So we were really doing a lot of frequent check-ins with the staff members, because again, not only was it a student within our school community, but it was also a child of one of our staff members. So it was just that much, more important for all of us, especially as a practitioner and as a nurse in the school setting, to make sure that I was just doing those frequent check-ins with all of those staff members, even after we had done the in-service.
I think that's fantastic. My role, as I mentioned before, is my title is school intervention specialist. School liaison is another way. And I work as a liaison between the family, the school, and the medical team. Prior to this position, I was in the classroom, I was a classroom teacher. So I come with those perspectives, and more positions like mine are popping up across the country. So it's worthwhile to look to see if the Children's Hospital treating your student has a position like mine, because I'm able to offer peer in services as well as faculty in services for schools. Some schools that I work with jump right in and they want that. And so I'm able to go to the school, talk with the staff, talk with the students about the diagnosis in age appropriate terms for the students. With the adults, I can talk in just a very candid conversations. And so sometimes that's the full staff. Sometimes it's just the key stakeholders. We always start with the family and ask what they would like. And then from there, we talk to the school administration and just to make a decision what can best help the staff feel ready to meet the needs, both medical needs and educational needs of the student that has been diagnosed with cancer and is going through treatment or just wrapped it up. I have found that the schools that take advantage of the faculty in service really have great conversations that just really focus on the needs of the staff, ease any fears that they may have about the student coming back and just their ability to meet those needs. And it's just very impactful to be able to share and be vulnerable. And so I just would really encourage anyone to look to see if there is a person whose role is specific to acting in this position and coming to educate school staff and students as well. What do you think your school did well in helping the student transition back to the classroom that you would like to share with the others? Susan, since you're a school administrator, what do you feel like your school did well?
Well, I really believe one of the first things was knowing and understanding the situation by that really key communication piece. I feel like as the principal of the building, you truly do set the tone and you lead by example. And so it's not something I was comfortable just saying here, to the school nurse or here to the counselor. We had to be a team because we all play a vital role in this transition back to school. And it took us time, and I had to first understand what the disease was, what the diagnosis was, what remission means, all those terms, because when kids ask questions, especially in an elementary school, they're going to ask the questions. And even teachers, it's unfortunate that there's some lack of communications in other stories we've heard, but I can't emphasize that enough, the communication piece. When a child's sitting in your classroom battling this and carrying this hardship with them, the teacher should know, and the teacher should be on that team really understanding all that comes with having a student in this particular situation. Making sure that the parents, I think we did well having access to the 504, keeping that plan fluid as things change, as age changes, different things change as kids get older. And I think the other piece is you as a principal, as the building leader, I know every child in my school, and I know them by name, I connect with them, but you have to keep your own emotions in check. Every time I was notified of a relapse, I had to take a few minutes before I could really get into, okay, this is the plan, this is what we've got to do. And the biggest thing I think that, my school, my area did well is advocating for this student, advocating and supporting LLS. And like, I think some of us, we said, like, putting a face to it, making that connection. And, you read and see commercials, or when you're on the internet, all these things, but when it really hits home, the principal of the building is that driver on how all these things are going to come into play and keep everyone connected and keeping that student connected to the school.
So I'll just like to add on to what Susan was saying and just emphasize that as well. From the school nurse's perspective, the communication cannot be, overemphasized. And then advocacy, I think, is huge as well. I completely agree. We can't assume that the parents are going to know how to advocate for their child. I can tell you as a parent going through this journey with my own child and as a school nurse, again, like I had mentioned, this is by far the most stressful situation I have ever experienced in my life. And so you've got to deal with all the medical stuff, plus try to figure out this transition back to school and everything. And it can be a very daunting task. So as Susan had mentioned, no matter what your role is, you have a role to play in this. Whether you're the school nurse, whether you're the teacher, whether you're administrator or counselor, you have a role to play to come together and kind of work on that multidisciplinary team. Frequent check-ins, I do those all the time, both with the teacher and students and parents, because again, I can't assume that every staff member that's going to be taking care of this student understands the disease. I may need to go back. It's a lot of information to cover. I may need to go back and do some retraining. I may need to go, as Susan had mentioned a couple of times, actually, that, this is a fluid process. There may be relapses. There may be changes in the disease. Heck, there may be emotional changes for the student and the family where you've got to check in and say, okay, where are we at today? There could even be financial need changes. So in the beginning where they're like, no, I don't want any of that support or anything, we just really want to keep everything the same and normal, if you will. They may be at a point where they really do need that financial assistance, or they do need those kind of fundraisers later on because things change. The disease changes as, it's progressing and everything, or maybe the treatment changes. And I think our district did a lot of those things really well. We really listened to our families. And we also, really took the time to advocate and assist the families when they didn't really understand or know where to go next. What's the next step? How do we navigate this next chapter in this journey, of the disease and everything and returning to school? One of the things I'm most proud of for a student of ours that unfortunately did pass away was his favorite thing to do was to go to school. At the end of his life, his absolute bar none favorite thing to do was to go to school. And we as a team came together to make that happen for him. every single day that he felt well enough that he wanted to be at school, we made it happen so that he could be at school. So Courtney, that's by far one of the biggest accomplishments, I think, for our district, is to make that happen.
That's incredible. And it's incredible that the school embraced that and made that happen for that child. So thanks for sharing that story.
So I'm hearing a very common theme, like Susan mentioned advocacy, David mentioned it. And one thing that that we did for our student was when our student entered kindergarten, we put a 504 plan in place. And the 504 plan really met his needs until he was about in 4th grade. And even though he had been in remission for a few years, one thing that the teachers had noticed, now this was an advanced kind of borderline gifted kid for many years, but one thing that the teachers started to notice end of 4th grade was he was having a lot of short-term memory deficits from the chemo and medication that he was taking. So, it comes back again to advocacy. Thank God that teachers spoke up and said, hey, we're noticing this. And, mom spoke up, hey, we're noticing this. So one of the things that we did before he left our school was we actually were able to convert him over to an IEP with the diagnosis of, other health impaired, to put that academic support in for him going into middle school. Because, that of course is the one thing that the 504 plans lack, is they make these accommodations and modifications, but they don't provide academic support. So we knew the transition to middle school would be difficult for him. So we wanted him, to go into middle with the best support system in place. So I was kind of happy to do that and be a part of that process to get him, all the help that he needed and deserved.
That's really great. Just a really great story. So thanks for sharing that. So what do you think your school would do differently? What lessons did you or your school take away from this experience, and how would that change the way you would do things in the future?
With our school, I think communication could have been a little bit better. Like when changes would occur, I would not know. Like for instance, his cancer came back during the 7th grade year. And so he was doing homeschooling, virtual schooling, and we were not notified. And I'm just like, once he's my student, he's always my student. So I feel like, all the teachers should, that have had him should know these things, that's going on. And two, so we could support, the next teacher, and help them out with whatever difficulties, they may be having with him or her. But yeah, communication is a big issue for me. Our school did do great with check-ins. Like they were really great with checking in with him. His principal was great with checking in with him, daily to see how he was doing, how he was, getting back into the school. But just letting us know more of what to do as far as making sure that health-wise, he's okay at the school. Because, I know, limited information about cancer and remission and stuff, but thinking back on it, it was like, well, maybe should I have been cleaning, should I have been doing something extra to, make sure health-wise, he was okay,
I think that we've kind of heard that throughout this conversation, that communication is so important for everybody, like for all parties involved, to ensure success. So I think that's a really great point. I would love to add that I think that with really good intention, a lot of times that the teachers that I've had experience with will say to students when it comes to doing their work, just do what you can, focus on getting healthy. And obviously getting healthy is everyone's priority, most importantly, the student's priority. But as several of you have alluded before, school is really important to kids, and kids need that, and they need expectation. So if we just say, do what you can, some kids are going to either do everything because they want to do everything that's required of them, or some kids will do nothing at all. So I feel like it's really important as educators to have really clear expectations for kids for what's expected. What do they need to do to show mastery of content and move on to the next grade level? Obviously, they're going to focus on their health and getting better. But I think that just having those clear expectations helps them. And I also feel like being honest with kids is really important. And I've seen that in the medical world. And I've seen that in the education world. And when teachers and when doctors and when everybody involved are honest with kids, they respond better. So they need to know, like, what is my outcome? For David's student, I'm sure that when he was looking at end of life, having those conversations with his peer group as well takes away that wonder and takes away a lot of that emotional piece that that kids are curious about. And if we're honest with them, there's no room for them to question like what exactly is going on.
I've experienced that as well, where through good intentions, individuals have cut the student out of the loop, and it can be quite detrimental sometimes. And I think that the honesty and being upfront, obviously, again, as we've said time and time again, partnering with the parents, so we're not overstepping, but we really want to include those students in these conversations so that they're at the center of it. We don't ever want to exclude them, so that they know what's going on and what they can expect as well, because knowing those expectations, as you mentioned, Courtney, is going to be the key to their success, and having those expectations for them too. So I completely agree.
Yeah.
As you were saying earlier about holding them accountable, that was one thing that I was thinking about throughout this whole thing. He came in with such a good spirit, and he was so excited to be at school, and he wanted to do what everybody else was doing. So he would at some point start slipping, in his work and stuff, because he was so excited. He just want to chat all day. But I would hold him accountable, and I would contact his mother like I would any other mother and say, hey, he didn't finish this assignment today. What are we going to do? What can we do? And she was very supportive, and she was very good at holding him accountable as well. So, that to me, like I personally have a son who has had, we adopted him, and he had lost his leg at a late age at 16. And so he was the exact opposite of my student, where he was like, oh, well, it's me, what am I going to do? And he, even though there's nothing wrong with him academically, he used the leg as, I can't get anything done. Versus, this kid that came into my class, he was like, oh, this is not an issue for me. I want to play sports. I want to do this and that and the other. Like, so he made it easy for me to hold him accountable. But I can also see how if you have a kid, that, is poor woe is me kind of attitude and kind of sunk low in their situation, where teachers can kind of get a little too, like, oh, well, I'm just going to let him scrape by kind of thing. But, I'm glad to say that I'm not that particular type of teacher, because I've seen kids from all different backgrounds and come from all different kinds of things. And no matter what their situation is, they have to, be held accountable and be pushed to show that they can do whatever it is they want to do in life.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful point. That is a great takeaway for all teachers. That level of expectation is so important, just for long-term thoughts and like the way that where are we going with this as far as like from the student perspective. So I think that's really, really fantastic. Does anybody have anything else to add to this conversation today? Any other experiences that you want to share?
I want to just send another message to the folks that are watching this message, that you have a very important role to play in the success of the students that is in your school, that's either returning back from having a cancer treatment, returning back to school, or if they're in the middle of treatments. You can make a real difference in their life, whether it's through communicating, whether it's through listening, whether it's through advocating for the students. So I just want to thank everybody that's actually watching this as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Well, I want to thank all of our panelists today for sharing such important and practical information on how to best serve the students during and after cancer treatment, their peers, and the school staff. We hope you'll take this information back to your school and share it with your colleagues. I want to encourage all of you to participate in the online Staying Connected program, which provides comprehensive information on the cancers that affect children and adolescents and young adults, psychosocial challenges for survivors, laws that protect the survivors' rights, coping with grief and loss, and strategies to meet the students' needs. Please visit www.lls.org/stayingconnected to learn more. If you have any further questions, please contact an LLS information specialist by calling 1-800-955-4572. Information specialists provide personalized one-on-one support to help patients learn more about disease, treatments, financial and other support resources, and provide resources for professionals. Thank you all.